Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're well. Thanks for joining. I apologize for those who are online that I'm using my phone, my iPhone, to do this today rather than the laptop. I don't know why I'm having some issues. So therefore, I'm not able to project on the screen the source sheet. But you can access the source sheet by the email that went out. You'll see there's that says here. Click here for the source sheet we'll be using. Okay, but I welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. Today is Wednesday. It is the 18th of March, and we're getting ready for Parshas Vayikra. This is the first. This is the first Shabbos in a while that we haven't had a special maftir because of the fact that it's not the Arba Parshios anymore. So we're just Parshas Vayikra, and next week will be a Shabbos Hagadol. It's hard to believe. Is it next week? Oh, 2 weeks. I'm sorry, 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Okay, so this week, I'm sorry. Sorry to do that. Everyone, I just raised the anxiety level. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this week and next week is just a regular Shabbos and laning. So let's see Parshas Vayikra. I want to share a couple of sources with you that I hope you'll find interesting and will get us in the mood for this parsha. So let's see the first one. The first one is right at the beginning of Vayikra. Vayikra is the third book of the Torah. And in Vayikra, we're going to learn a lot about the korbanos, all of the offerings that were brought first in the Mishkan in the wilderness, and then later in the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. So let's see. The pasuk says, "Im olah karbano." If the sacrifice that's being brought is a korban olah, the olah is the completely burnt offering. Min habakar, if it's being brought from cattle, so it says zachar tamim yakrivenu. It needs to be an unblemished male. El Pesach Oel Moed Yakriv, you should bring it willingly to the entrance of the Oel Moed, the tent of meeting. O Soler Tzonol Ifnei Hashem, and it's got to be brought there before Hashem. That's where it is. So we're being told that it's starting to tell us the laws of the Korban Olah. So I want to share with you something very nice that I saw in the Sefer Tam Vadas. So Sefer Tam Vadas, that's Rabbi Sternbach in Yerushalayim, he brings down here, there's a very, very famous and fundamental dispute between Rambam, who's Maimonides, and Ramban, Nachmanides, which is about how do we understand the very concept of korbanos, offerings, sacrifices are sometimes called, offerings, animal offerings that are being brought to God. So this is a very important dispute to be aware of, as all of us want to be knowledgeable Jews. This is a fundamental disagreement between Rambam and Ramban, and it's important that we know. And he's going to bring down the dispute. You'll find it in any chumash that has the Ramban's Nachmanides commentary in it. You'll find this argument brought down. However, what Rabbi Sternbach does, and what I think is very, very useful, what he does here is that he gives some more understanding to the Rambam, to Maimonides, that perhaps more understanding than what we would have had before. And that's what I want to share with you. So let's see. He's going to start by quoting Ramban, Nachmanides, because that's where this is most accessible, because anyone who's got a Chumash Mikros Gedolos, you'll have the Ramban. So let's see what he says. Imalo Korbanos, or Sternbach in his commentary is quoting the Ramban. He says, Baramban, here's what you'll find in the Ramban, in Nachmanides. It says as follows. Amar Harav, he quotes the Rav, meaning he's talking about Maimonides. Amar Rav b'Mor Nevuchim, in his work, his seminal work, Mor Nevuchim, which was, again, it's mostly called a philosophical work, but it's really more than that. The whole third section of it is Tamei HaMitzvos. It's like a Sefer HaChinuch, where he's offering, based on his understanding of Judaism, he's offering potential reasons behind the mitzvos. So in the Mor Nevuchim, here's what you'll find Maimonides writes. Kitama Korbanos, he suggests that the reason for Korbanos, for animal offerings, are Bavur, it was for this very reason. Shahamitzrim v'hakastim, the Egyptians and the Kastim are the Chaldeans, those are where Avram Avinu started off. Asher Hayu Yisrael Garim v'toshavim b'artzam. That's where, in the early days of our people's history, those are the lands in which we dwelt, and those were who we grew up around. Me'olam, from time immemorial, that's where the Jewish people started off, living amongst idolaters. Hayu ovdim levakar uletzon. They lived amongst people who worshipped animals. Again, again, just like Egyptians didn't actually worship, so to say, they didn't wake up one morning and worship sheep. They rather worship the constellation up in the heavens, and they said, okay, we have to show great honor to its earthly representative, and that would explain why they deified them. So he says Jewish people grew up around Egyptians and around the Kasdim, people who worshipped animals. They showed great reverence to, and they deified bakar as cattle and so on as sheep. Ki hamitzrim ovdim lamazal tzleh. And again, Rambam says, again, how did this all start? That the Egyptians, they worshipped the mazel, the constellation, whose heavenly representative was the sheep. That would have been Aries, the ram. So its earthly representative would have been the sheep. V'akasdim and the Chaldeans, ovdim l'shedim, they worshipped all sorts of demons. Asher yiru lahem b'dmus seirim, that in their understanding, they took on the earthly form of seirim, are goats. So they worship goats. V'anshe Hodu, and people who live in India, Arayom, Rambam is writing this over 800 years ago, that the Indian people who are living in India until today, in his time, lo yishchatu bakar li'olam, they won't slaughter any cattle, which is true in our days as well. I have a niece who recently went because of work. They have a call center in India, and they went to some little poor village in India because one of the heads of that call center was getting married. So she and her business partner, they went out to India for this wedding. She had these pictures and videos she sent me from this really wild trip, but she says, I don't believe this. This is everything we've read about. Just loose cattle, just walking around, roaming around, leaving their manure in the middle of the street and stuff, but nobody will shoot them, nobody will touch them because they have deified cattle. That's what Rambam is writing, and it's going on today in parts of India still. But Avurza, specifically because of this, because we, the Jewish people, were living amongst nations of the world who had deified animals, but Avurza, because of this, Tziva lishchot ela shlosha minim l'shem hanechbad. God said specifically, you are going to slaughter those animals, those same animals which people out there are showing great reverence to. I'm going to show you that they are nothing that need to be given reverential treatment. To the contrary, you're going to slaughter them and burn them on my altar. Kadesh Yivada, in order, God wanted to root out of our hearts once and for always. Ki adavar shayuchoshim shem betachlis avoda, those entities which those erring nations have thought are worthy of veneration, hu asher yakrivu labore. Those specifically are the ones that you're supposed to slaughter, sprinkle their blood, burn their fats, and bring them as a korban to me, as a way of saying, like, who's in charge here? That's what we're going to do. So it's a way almost to root it out of our system. Ubo yiskapru avanos, and by this we will achieve atonement for our sins. So this is Ramban Nachmanides starts by quoting Rambam. Rambam's position is that the purpose, the time for karbanos is because we grew up around these idolatrous sects, which went ahead and assigned and deified these various animals and led their people astray to begin worshiping them. To make certain we do not do this, the Torah said those animals specifically, cattle, sheep, goats, you are going to slaughter them, which is something those nations which had deified them would never do. You are going to slaughter them, and that you will root out of your system, get it out of your kishkas, that there's anything to this mindset at all. That didn't really work, how so? It didn't really work because throughout the Nevi'im, correct, the pull and the lure towards idol worship was so strong. Again, but some of those idols we were worshiping, though, you might say, weren't necessarily sheep, goats, and cattle. We were falling into other messes. Yeah.
Question just briefly, and that is that if Hashem took away the Yetzer Hara to worship idols and to, whatever the process was of worshiping those idols, why?
So you're asking a great question. According to Rambam, if Rambam is saying that the entire reason behind korbanos is to root this stuff out of our system, at a certain point, it's done. The Jews aren't living amongst those nations anymore, And Abby's bringing up the Gemara that says God took away our Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. So then, well, how would Rambam explain the purpose for Karbanos? So that's a very good question. If we're going to understand Rambam, that Rambam is saying this is its reason in its entirety, there's some holes that you can shoot in his theory. Abby's asking hers, and soon we'll see Ramban, Nachmanides, he asks his. But that's that's a very good question on Rambam. Now we're continuing in the Ramban. So Ramban starts by quoting this general idea from Maimonides, and then he does not like them at all. So I'm in the middle of that line, or actually towards the end of the line, Vihine, Ramban Nachmanides, who usually is very deferential to Rambam, to Maimonides, he writes, Vihine Hem Divrei Havai. With all due respect, that whenever anyone says with all due respect, it means, oh boy, here it comes. So he says, with all due respect, everything Rambam just said about Karbanos are nonsense. Yirbu Shever Gadol V'Kusha Gadola Al Nikla. There are numerous questions that can be asked on Rambam's theory. Yasu Shulchan Hashem Migual Sheinenu Rak Lahutzi Miliban Shal Rishon V'Tiv Sheolam. First question. Does it make sense that God, in his innermost sanctum, in his Beis HaMikdash, in his Mishkan, would set up something called a Mizbeach, that the entire purpose is just to do something to root out something which is absolutely abhorrent nonsense that the nations of the world came up with? In other words, Rambam is saying there's nothing intrinsically special about Karbanos. The whole exercise of Karbanos was to get something which was a disgusting piece of nonsense out of our system. Would it make sense that's in the Beis HaMikdash? I could understand that God would say, okay, this is something you got to do until you get it out of your system. You set it up somewhere else. But that should become this process of kadosh, something in the sanctuary. We're going to set some whole thing up, which is about rooting out some ridiculous idolatrous cult. Does that make sense? That's his question number one. V'akasav Amar, what does God say about Karbanos? Kim lechem isha l'reach nichoach. The Torah says about Karbanos, there's some kind of pleasant odor, some pleasant aroma that when God smells that aroma, it somehow brings the nachas, brings some kind of sense of pleasantness to God. But that means there is something intrinsic about Karbanos that are beneficial. Rambam is saying that the entire purpose of Karbanos are to root out this false, disgusting ideology that idol-worshipping nations of the world have come up with. But that's not so. The Torah constantly makes it sound like there is some intrinsic value to it. Furthermore, he says, Vinay, he goes, I'll tell you a second question. Noach b'tseiso min hateva, when Noach left the ark, were there any idolaters in the world at that time? No. Everyone's just been destroyed. It's just Noach and his sons. Everyone there believes in monotheism at that point. What's the first thing Noach does? He sets up an altar and he brings a korban. He says, he comes out of the ark with his three sons. They all believe in God. There's only monotheism. Ein ba'olam kasti. There's no Chaldean in the world. Oh, Mitzri, there's no Egyptian. Hikriv korban. He decides to bring a korban. V'yetev be'enei Hashem. And it says God was pleased with this. And he goes, I'll even take you back earlier in history. Cain and Hevel, Adam Arishon's two sons. Hevel hevi gamhu mi b'choros tzono mechalveim. And it says, Vayisha Hashem el Hevel v'milchaso. That Hevel decides that he's going to bring an offering to God, and God turns to that offering. There wasn't even a hint of idol worship in the world at this time. And he says, Ayin Sham, look there, and you'll see Sharich Ramban Lafarish. Then Rambam asks more, Menachmanides asks more questions on Rambam, and he goes and gives his own reason. Ramban's own reason that he gives is basically that Hashem was creating an exercise that would shake us up to the core. When a person stands in the Beis HaMikdash and he watches an animal which shares so much in common with a human being. It has a head, we have a head. It has hind legs, we have hind legs. It has four legs, we have arms. When it's cut open, when its throat is slit, it's got blood, we got blood. When it's cut open, all of its internal organs, we pretty much have all those same internal organs. They may be shaped different and slightly different placing, but there's a lot of similarities. And when a person is standing there in the Beis HaMikdash, Ramban Nachmanides suggests, and we see what's going on to that animal, it shakes us to the core, and we say, oh my gosh, because of what I've done wrong, it really would have made sense that I violated the code of the creator creator of heavens and earth, I really should be put to death. But instead, this is what's happening to this animal, and you're watching all this happen. It shakes a person to core. It's such an emotional experience. It'll rattle a person, and that's what we all need to get us back on the wagon. That's essentially what Ramban, what Nachmanides sets up. Abby's saying, okay, I can understand why that would work for a carbon khatas, but let's say an all other. Good question. And I think what we're going to have to say is what Rabbi Sternbach is going to say in a minute. We're going to have to say for Ramban as well. But on a basic level, that's what Ramban is saying, is that there's something so jarring about witnessing a korban. It's supposed to shake everyone up to the core, and it's supposed to make it that anyone who sees this is like, whoa, I got to get my life back together. I got to get back on track. That seems to be what Ramban Nachmanides sets up. And just as a total aside, I once spoke with someone who was involved in Jewish outreach, and he said that he had an extensive conversation once with a Jewish kid who had gone on a backpacking trip somewhere to the Far East and had actually been present in some temple where they had sacrificed an animal. I don't know which religious expression this was. Sacrificed some animal, like, chopped it up with machetes. And he said that he's never in his life ever seen something so jarring like that, and just shook him to the core. And he said to him, like, wow, it's so interesting you say that, because Ramban, Nachmanides, that's a lot of his idea about what we're supposed to get out of a carbon experience. It's so interesting to hear you say this. Okay, but total aside, this is a fundamental dispute that takes place between Rambam, Maimonides, as again, who says it was all about rooting out of our heart the nonsense of these pagan cults who are into worshiping animals. Ramban doesn't like that at all. He has some very logical questions on Rambam. Again, most of them are is that Rambam is saying that there's no intrinsic value. So what about all the references in Tanakh that talks about a reich nichoach, that God, there's a pleasant aroma to God? And then you say it was about weeding out this ridiculous paganism and idol worship. How do you explain Noah? There was no idol worship in the world at that time. How do you explain Hevel? There was definitely no idol worship. These are like knockout blows to Rambam that Ramban Nachmanides is delivering. So Nachmanides has his own opinion that it's supposed to be this jarring experience. And there's questions like Abby raised. There's questions you can ask on Ramban as well. But on the surface, it looks like Ramban was totally dismissive of Rambam, and Rav Sternbach wants to say not so fast. I think you might be oversimplifying Rambam. So I'm only bringing down. You'll see 2 paragraphs here that essentially deal with this. So let's see at the bottom of page 1. B'nei yesh lahaktin v'lomar. I want to give a preface and say, Ki kol ma shanu danim v'omrim b'tamei mitzvos. Whatever anyone engages in the whole genre of tamei mitzvos, offering speculative theories behind the mitzvos, ein kavanas seinu klal bezod shezeh hasiba v'atan l'nesinas hamitzvozu. No one has the audacity to claim that I am telling you the absolute reason for this mitzvah. Every time we see a Sefer HaChinuch suggest a reason, he's saying a suggestion. Ultimately, only God knows the real reason. Unless God told us in the Torah a reason for a mitzvah, God in his divine wisdom, he knows the reason. Tamei mitzvos is trying to give us something to hold on to, something that might make it accessible. But no human would have the chutzpah to say this is the reason. We'll say this might be a potential understanding of it, but no one's going to say it's the reason. Ki ma tikva hanivra. What hope could any mortal have? Gush v'chomer, hasrei me'afar. We're physical and we're made from dirt. We lack the awareness of God. Lavo besoda bore, to possibly have the chutzpah to stand and say we understand the secrets of the Creator. Ulahasig b'tikunim aniflaim v'inyanim gedolim, to understand the mighty corrective spiritual forces that are being done when we do any mitzvah. Shepoelos kol mitzvah b'chol olamos, how they affect the cosmos. Gavoa me'al gavoa, all the levels. How could any human have the chutzpah to say we fully get it? Whenever anyone gets involved in the concept of coming up with suggested reasons behind any of the mitzvos, what we're saying is, I'm sorry, I skipped the line. Einanu misyamrim chas v'shalom shebanu b'sod nesinas mitzvos. Chas v'shalom, we don't have the chutzpah to say we got to the bottom of it and we fully understand the reason behind the mitzvah. Rak shegam lafi katnu sechlenu. Rather, what we're saying is, granted, I've got a mortal and I've got a very minimal understanding compared to God. Umiyud avanosenu, I can't possibly have the same understanding as God. However, yesh bevare b'mitzvos b'nosein tam shenuchol litom mitzufa davshan. We can still take taste some of the sweetness, some of the honey. A tam means I'm offering a taste of it. I'm not saying I understand the whole reason. I'm just giving us as humans something that we could grasp, something that we could hold on to. And because of the fact we've been given a potential reason, a potential taste of something, that'll make me more excited about that mitzvah, that I want to cling to it. But chas v'shalom to say I know there's the full reason. So he says, with that preface, now let's explain Rambam. Let's explain Maimonides. Rambam, page 2. Rambam shenosan tam lavodas karbanos. Rambam that suggested a reason behind offerings. Shehi ba la'akoras taos of the avodah zarah. That it's coming to root out from us. It's an exercise in getting this garbage out of our system. Gam hu ein kavanoso kipshuto. He doesn't mean, like in its simple reading, shashchita va'akrava shal behemos shal hanovdim goya ratzos, that by bringing the very animals that the nations of the pagans of the world were worshiping, bezos lavad yeh akav alavavos lamishor, he doesn't mean that that alone is going to set us straight. Elosh avodas hakarbanos olahi lemala lifolas pulasok if he rots on a mitzvah yisparashimo. First thing is, we have no idea the real reason behind karbanos. We don't know. And when we bring karbanos, they're going to accomplish whatever the godly. We have no idea. Yeshayahu Hanavi told us, "Ki lo machshavosai machshavosechem." My divine thoughts are not human thoughts. And ki gavo shemayim haaretz. The height, the distance between heaven and earth, that's the distance between God's thinking and our human thinking. So we don't have the chutzpah for a second to say we fully get it, but we say when we do this mitzvah, it's certainly accomplishing everything that God intended for accomplish. Whether that's karbanos, whether it's shaking lulav and esrog, whatever it is, it's accomplishing whatever mystical, cosmic reasons, spiritual forces, whatever God wants to accomplish, it's doing that. We have no idea the true reason behind this mitzvah. We have no idea what it's truly accomplishing. Whatever we can with the paucity, with our little mortal understanding, we're grasping at straws. But nonetheless, we are affected by our surroundings. When we hear nonstop, when we were living around people who are worshiping idols and worshiping these animals, it affects us. Even just hearing about it, it can still get the Jewish mind confused, and philosophical ideas that are not ours enter our system. Even if someone's not leaning that direction, being exposed to it eventually has an impact on us. Therefore, Rambam is saying, therefore, the King of the universe gave us an awesome tool. He knows that we are affected negatively by these terrible philosophies around us. So he says, you know what? I'm going to give you a beautiful mitzvah. The mitzvah, 99% of this mitzvah is accomplishing spiritual benefits that you can't possibly understand. When we observe it in all of its nuances, aside from all the cosmic energy that it's being produced and all the spiritual benefits that we have no clue about, nonetheless, there still is some sweet drippings that we can understand. And those sweet drippings that we can understand, it can help straighten us out, cleanse us from all of these foreign corrupt ideas that have crept into our system. Just observing this mitzvah helps to diminish the pull that we have towards avodah zarah. And it'll make it that we're not going to get any of this garbage into our system. It's going to weed that out. But if you were to ask Rambam, Maimonides, what's the reason for karbanos? He would say, I have no idea. So what did you suggest in Mor Nevuchim? That's a practical thing that Hashem, in his infinite wisdom, allowed us to have this benefit that I could say that here's a benefit that I could see. He would never have the chutzpah of saying that's the sole reason for karbanos. And if you said that's the sole reason, besides from being slapped up the head for being chutzpahnik, Ramban would have very good questions on him, because I could shoot holes in your system. But he's saying, but that was never Maimonides' intent. The true intent is because you're fulfilling the Ratzon Hashem and whatever cosmic answers is happening there, all that awesome stuff. One of the side benefits is what he said, that it would root out. Now you could have questions. Well, then people will say, well, then what's the point of Karbanos once we're not living amongst those people? Okay, the 99% of the reasons that's out there. Or maybe he would say, oh, what someone else, Nachmanides, is going to suggest. But at the original time, when it was given, when the Torah was given and we were living amongst idolaters, that was the very practical takeaway benefit that the Jewish people had from it. Otherwise, you'll have a question, well, in the third base of Mikdash, when it's rebuilt, why should there be Karbanos? We're not living around people like this anymore. So Rambam will say, you're right, that's no longer the reason for Karbanos. The main reason is always what it always was. 99% of the reason was because of the spiritual value of it. Or you could say like Ramban, like Nachmanides, that it's because it's to shake us up to the core. But even Nachmanides, you'll have the same question. And as Abby was asking, Nachmanides, you would have the same question. Nachmanides, you feel you're so mighty, you poked some holes in Rambam, I'll poke some holes in you. That works when it comes to a chatas, when someone's done something wrong. But you have an ola, you have other karbanos, you have other stuff that's not what if anyone's done anything wrong. You have for Yom Tovim where we bring communal korban tamid that's brought every day. What about all that? So even Ramban, you'd have to have questions. So Ramban would answer, "Oh, I never meant that's for 100% of the time. I meant, that's limited to a chadzas." So he's basically Rishon is saying the same grace. You have to extend it to Rambam too. So what I love about this is that you can't just dismiss Rambam. And any time any human being suggests Tamei Mitzvos, we're only human. There's going to be holes to poke in it. It's never going to answer all of our questions. It's Tamei Mitzvos, and that's what we have to understand. What Tamei Mitzvos are. They're just offering something to hold on to. No one would have the temerity to say this is the reason, and this is so helpful because whenever we learn anything in Sefer HaKadosh, it's never going to answer 100% of the questions. We'll always come up with an exception. The answer is because this was only a time. This was never meant. No one had the chutzpah to say this is the reason. You can't do that. And this is so incredible. I'll give you another example. Years ago, I must have mentioned this in a class. I came upon an article that someone sent diagrams of people wearing tefillin according to all the various minhagim, whether it was Sephardic custom, and even within Sephardim, there's different customs in terms of some different wrappings around the hand, slightly different about the arm, and Ashkenazim, different stuff, but sent charts of it about what proper tefillin placement would look like. They sent it to a Chinese acupuncturist, someone who really, really had good Masorah about the ancient art of acupuncture. And they said, what would you say about this? And they looked at it and they say, wow, to me, this looks like a prescription for how to basically have the clearest mind possible. These are all the points that I would want to press to have the clearest mind possible so someone could be in a state of focus. And they say, wow, that's fascinating because this is what Jews wear when Jewish men wear when they pray, and wouldn't that be fascinating? So I remember a friend of mine sent this to me and like, wow, this is Tamei Mitzvos. Look at this, the reason for tefillin. And I said the same thing. I said, God forbid, I would never say this is the reason. I'm sure this isn't. God is so mighty, and in his mind, I'm sure he knows the ancient Chinese formulas for acupuncture and which pressure points need to be touched in order to put someone in the right frame of mind. And I'm sure in his great wisdom of tefillin and all the cosmic good that it costs, that it causes, he knows all that, and he says, okay, in addition to that, this is something else we're going to do because it'll put you in a good mind for prayer. If you choose to do it right and choose to have that mindset. I know plenty of people, myself included, that a gazillion things come in my mind and I don't have a clear mind. And okay, this could be helpful, but if you're not really focusing, it's not going to do it. But anyhow, no one would say that this is the reason for tefillin, because then what about Shabbos and Yom Tov when we're not having tefillin? God didn't give us any. You can ask a million questions on it there. But I'm sure there's a gazillion cosmic reasons to tefillin that we'll never know. But at the end of the day, it doesn't surprise me in the least bit that there's some added benefit that's wrapped up in there. God designed the human being. He knows where our pressure points are. Of course, so if he's giving us a mitzvah and a good chunk of it, by the way, a good chunk of tefillin is not during prayer. In the original scheme of things, men were wearing tefillin much longer periods of time. So it wasn't just for tefillah. It was
wrapped up in it, cool.
What?
Wrapped up.
Oh, I said it. I did not mean that pun. Okay, there's someone's wrapped up in that. So I did not mean that pun. Thank you, Lil. But that's the that's a very similar illustration of it. So I have no doubt that that benefit is there, but I'd be a fool to say that that's the sole reason of it. Okay, but anyhow, I think this is a very fundamental, first of all, fundamental machlokas to know between Rambam Maimonides and Ramban Nachmanides, and it's important, I think, what Rav Sternbuch did to point out, to, so to say, defend Rambam here, because Ramban really goes to town on him here, and just understand that wasn't Rambam's intent, that wasn't Maimonides' intent to say this is the reason, because you'll poke holes in it. And I think, and as Abby pointed out, you'd have to say this for Ramban Nachmanides too, because you can poke holes in in Ramban's approach as well. So I think this is just a very fundamental idea. First of all, to understand this dispute, but then also to understand what are the limitations and what are we hoping to accomplish whenever we engage in ta'amei mitzvos, coming up with speculative theories behind the mitzvos. It's in order to draw human hearts closer and make that mitzvah more endearing to us, because it requires a great amount of emunah, every mitzvah we do, to say, I have no idea of any practical benefit to this mitzvah. Only reason I'm doing this is because I have full faith in God, and this is causing great things up in the cosmos. Okay, that's great. And if we're all able to muster that strength for every mitzvah we do, that's great. However, there's going to be times where some mitzvahs could be a bit more challenging and may require some more work on our part. If I could look at a sefer that can say, no, there's some immediate benefit that I can help you understand why this mitzvah helps you, that could increase my motivation level and make that mitzvah more dear to me and give me the oomph that I need to jump over that hurdle that might be there to accomplish it sometimes. That's the purpose of Tamei HaMitzvos. But nobody is so bold and so chutzpahdik to propose, this is the reason I understand the mind of the divine. That's it. That we would never do that. So I think that's a very important piece there.
Exercise to decide that somebody will say, what do you think we're going to have korbanos on the third base? So maybe as you mentioned it.
Yeah, there are people who do that.
It's like,
yeah, they'll say that's so old world. Yeah. So again, so what we would say, so we would say back, right? So we would say back to that, yeah, korbanos only seems odd if our only frame of reference for this is this was something in the ancient world, and either it was being done for rooting out pagan worship from our hearts. But if there's something bigger going on, then it makes sense why it would exist in the future as well when the third base at Mikdash is going to be revealed. Absolutely. All right, let's take a look at our next Dvar Torah. It's on page 3. This is also, I thought, a great concept that we can't emphasize enough. But we're going to see two slightly different approaches to it. So a little bit later in the Parsha, it talks about the Mizbeach and the Eish, the fire that would be placed on the altar. So the Torah says, V'nasnu b'nei Aaron hakohen Eish al Mizbeach. So it says that we're supposed to put, I'm sorry, bottom of page 2, that's where I am. Bottom of page 2, it says that V'nasnu b'nei Aaron hakohen eish al mizbeach, that Aaron and his descendants, the Kohanim, they should put fire on the mizbeach, and it says Varchu eitzim al eish, and then arrange wood on that fire. So look at Rashi there. Rashi quotes the Gemara and the Medrash. It says V'nasnu eish. It says Af al pisha eish yoredes min hashamayim. Even though a miracle would occur and fire would descend from heaven, nonetheless, mitzvah lavi mina hedjot. It still is a mitzvah to bring human fire to the mizbeach. There's, even though something miraculous was going to occur, still we need to do something. We need to take our own initiative. We need to do something on our own. So Rav Sternbuch on page 3 starts off pointing out V'nasnu b'nei Aaron kohen eish al mizbeach. He quotes the Rashi we just saw. Af al pisha eish yoredes min hashamayim. Even though the fire is going to come down from heaven, it's going to be miraculous, and that would be daily. Mitzvah lahavi mina hedjot. It still is a mitzvah to start the process by taking out our Zippo lighters or whatever, however they lit the fire in the wilderness, flint, stone, whatever it would be, and start up that fire on our own, and then fire would descend from heaven. So he quotes the Taz. The Taz is one of our great commentators to the Shulchan Aruch, known as Taz is an acronym for Turei Zahav. It was written by Rav David Halevi Siegel in the 1600s, one of our great leaders of Polish Jewry. So in his commentary, right at the beginning of Hilchos Chanukah, astonishing where he writes this, he brings down a Zohar, and that's what he's quoting here. He's quoting what the Taz writes in his commentary to Hilchos Chanukah. So let's see what he says. The Taz writes this in the Shulchan Aruch. Maybe Me'azor HaKodesh, he quotes the Holy Zohar, Al Nes Hashemen, about the miracle of the oil that happened in the time of Hanukkah miracle. Sha'amar, I'm sorry, but he was using that as a reference. In other words, the miracle of the oil, he used that to bring down the Zohar that talks about another miracle that occurred in Tanakh with oil, and that was the miracle with Elisha. Elisha was a Navi, he was a student of Eliyahu, and Elisha Hanavi once finds himself at by a destitute woman who's crying to him that she's absolutely correct. She was broke and she couldn't pay her debts, and they were coming to claim whatever she had in the house, and even her own son. So she's crying to Elisha, and Elisha wants to help her. So it says Shamar Elisha la Isha minashe b'nei Hanavim. He wants to help out this lady who is a lady that the Tanakh identifies her as Mibnei Nevi'im, from a descendant of prophets. She cried out to him, Ma yesh l'chi babayis, what do you have in your house? In other words, I'm going to help cause a miracle, but I need to know, what do you have in your house? For this miracle to occur, I need something that's already here. Therefore, he asks her, what do you have available? God doesn't just make miracles ex nihilo. He did that during the 6 days of creation. Now that our world is here, he builds upon human initiative. That's what God does. God's miracles are built. We take action, and God builds on that. And what's already here? Afilu davar muat. And Elisha's asking her, it's even if it's something little, but you have to show me, what do you already have? God's not going to create something out of nothing. Yesh me'ayin. He could increase what you already have, but you have to have something. You have to have a minuscule amount. Then God could create a miracle to increase that. As opposed to if you have nothing in your house, ain't shayich bo bracha. It's not just God isn't interested. It can't happen. He's saying, the Taz is explaining that's what the Zohar means. Why by Elisha and this destitute woman? He's saying once the world has been created, the Shishi Yemei Bereshis are done. It can't happen. The way it works is that God is done creating ex nihilo, yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. He'll increase what's already here. That's the miracles that God does in our world, but he will not cause something that was not here in the first place to all of a sudden pop into existence. Ein shaykh bo bracha lasos beria chadasha. Once the 6 days of creation are over, God doesn't make a beria chadasha, a brand new entity. Bira dvarim nira. So now Rav Sternbach is saying, what does the Taz mean by this? Ki lefisha kodesh baruch hu, since God is kilafi shakadosh baruch hu haaretz nasan lebnei adam, since God stated that the land, that the earth belongs to humankind, lefichach lo yasa Hashem davar ki imas chalaso hu al yidei ma'isa adam. Therefore, in other words, once God decreed the 6 days of creation are over, and now haaretz nasan lebnei adam, the world has been given to humans, God will not step in unless we humans do a ma'isa adam, do something on our own first. And now, so Rav Shturmach wants to say that's pshat in this pasuk. Rashi says that we were commanded to bring our own earthly fire to the Mizbeach, even though a fire is going to descend from heaven. Why was that earthly fire necessary? So he's saying, based on what the Taz wrote in the Shulchan Aruch, that's why here we need to have a fire. Gam eish Mizbeach shetchila yeh al yedei ma'isa hedyo davka, specifically has to start off by human hands. Sheyivaru es atzei maracha, that we first are burning the logs that have been set up, tinder, and we're burning logs and sticks and that are logs that are on the Mizbeach, Beish Mimeduras Beis Hamukad, only then will a fire descend from heaven. But without us doing something at first, it's not going to happen. So miracles will occur, but we have to take action. And that's the lesson here. What a powerful, powerful lesson. Correct. We have to take the initiative. It doesn't work. Anyone who's just going to sit back and say, God, take care of my world for me. Once the Shishi Yemei Bereshis are done, we have to do our initiative. Hishtadlus is called. We have to put in our efforts, and only then can bracha flow to us. He can increase what we've done, but he can't just do yesh me'ayin. That's just not the way it works. God, so to say, limits himself. Of course, he could do it if he wanted to. He created the cosmos, but he limits himself. He said, Hashemayim Shemaim Hashem va'aretz nasan livnei adam. God says, I've given the world to humanity, and I just get, these are my my self-created restriction, so to say.
It was insanely miraculous.
Oh.
It's every single.
So that's what I want to get to in a second. We'll get there in 1 second. So a slightly different approach to this, though, is in the chinuch. We don't have enough time to see the chinuch inside, but the chinuch says about this, it's not pshat, and this is a fine distinction. It's not that God can't do it. In other words, the Zohar is saying, the way the Taz explained it, God can't do it. It's a self-imposed restriction. God created a restriction on himself. He cannot do it. Once the 6 days of creation are up, the world has been handed over to mankind. We have to act, and when we act, now God can get involved and increase. God can increase what we do, but he can't do out of it. These are self-imposed restrictions. That's the way the Zohar says it. The Chinuch says a little bit different. The Chinuch says God, after the 6 days of creation were up, he chooses to hide himself. He chooses to be beseser. He tries to minimize his involvement in our world. So why was it necessary to put the fire on the Mizbeach? Not that it can't be done. Of course God could do it, but that's just not the way he operates. God operates, it's not a self-imposed restriction that he can't do it. He could do it, but it's a different restriction. He doesn't want it to be so obvious, because if it was so obvious, the miracles that he's causing are so obvious, it seems like we would lose free will and again. So God wants us to take action, and he'll build on that, not because it's like against his chukei hateva, his laws of creation of haaretz nesan l'bnei adam, but rather he wants to cloak himself, make his sign less obvious. And this is an approach we saw. The Chinuch says this here by the fire in the Mizbeach, but Ramban, Nachmanides, we started off in our first of our Torah, Ramban takes this approach throughout Tanakh. And the place that I want to share with you, and this is the last item I've got on sheet 4, is that he says this in Parshas Noach by the Teva. This is something by the flood story. This is a very, very fundamental. This is another point I think we all have to be aware of. And I've spoken to other rabbis who are out there who weren't familiar with this, and I think it's a very, very familiar thing. We have to. This is what the Chinuch is saying. Ramban says it, and this is a very important approach. That again, God tries to minimize his apparent involvement as much as possible. Let's just see this, and then I know we're a minute or two over. Let's just see this because it's an important Ramban. It's not the whole Ramban, but this is the essence of it. So this Ramban is in Parshas Noach. It's when Hashem tells Noach, you have to collect all the animals of the world for your ark. So it's in Perek Vav, chapter 6, Pasuk Yutes, verse 19. So he says, Mikol Basar, I need you to collect animals from all living flesh. Yadua, it's known, Kichayos Rabos Mod. There are so many animals in this world. Umehan Gedolos Mod, Kipilum, there are some that are enormous, like elephants. Re'emim, and like it's a machlokas what exactly a re'em is, but it's a very large animal. Vizula, some stuff like that. And then to the opposite extreme, you have Varemes or Rames Alaretz Ramod. You've got creepy crawly things which are tiny. Gameof. Now think about Ov Hashemayim, think about all the birds in the skies. Minim Rabim, there are so many. Ein La Mispar, there's no way to even count them. Ukamo Sham Rabasenu, like the sages tell us in Chulin. Meya ve'esrim mine ofos tameim. There are 120 non-kosher birds, yesh b'mizrach, in the eastern section of the world. V'chula min ayahem. And all 120, they all fall under the umbrella of the ayah family. So that's just one ayah. There are so many more that are out there. Ulofos tahorim and all the kosher birds, ain't mispar. There's no way to even count. V'nei yitztarch lavi mikulam sheyoldu kamosam. And now God's telling Noach, gather all of them so they could repopulate the world with their offspring. The kasher tesof lekulam. Now, in addition to all those animals and birds, you've also got to bring food. Maichol asher yochal hashana tamima, enough food for them all to eat. Lo tachal osama tevazos. Do the math. This teva that God told Noach to build, it can't possibly hold all that. V'lo eser kiyosme, even if you make an armada of 10 ships like this, you can't do it. Avalunes, the only way to explain this is to say a miracle happened. Hexik muat esamaruba. Something which was small, meaning the dimensions of this teva, held something which was great. This unbelievable. It makes no sense. You kept bringing in food. It doesn't make sense. The math doesn't add up. How did you fit that much food in the teva? Doesn't add up. It just worked. How did you fit those many creatures in the teva? Doesn't add. It just worked. There's no way to explain it. Something miraculous happened. V'im Tomar. So Ramban asks the question. 1 second. Once miracles are happening, there's a much easier way to do all this. Yasen Ktana. What was the benefit? Why did he make Noach? Poor Noach. If he made him schlep and build this massive ship, if you're already going to do miracles, just have him build a canoe. Why does he got to build this massive ship? The Indians did it great, just hollowing one tree, and you got a canoe and do your miracles. Why do you got to make him build this whole enormous ship? He goes, Yismach alanes. Just do something small, make a small canoe, and rely on miracles. So what's his answer? So he gives two answers. Answer number one is not as important for us as answer number two. Answer number one, God wanted him to make it so large. He wanted the whole generation to see him building something large. He wanted them to be astonished. Noach, what on earth are you building? That'll create conversation. And I'll start telling about the upcoming flood. And I'll tell him to bring in all the animals. Maybe that'll inspire some people to change their ways. In other words, if it was just a canoe, no one would make conversation. But if he's making this enormous ark, he's building an aircraft carrier. Now all of a sudden, it wasn't as large as an aircraft carrier. He's saying if he's building this enormous ark, now it's going to create some buzz. It's going to create conversation. Okay, that's a great answer, but let's look at answer number two. Va'od. Here's his Ramban's second answer. Asu oso gedola. God told him, make it big. Lema'et benes. That way I get to minimize my miracle. I'm going to still have to do miracles. But now I made it a little bit less. Kikena derech b'chol anisim shebetorah. Ramban Nachmanides says this is God's constant method of operating when it comes to miracles in the whole Torah. Oben Nevi'im or in the Nevi'im as well. Lasos ma shebiyadam lasos. We first do our part, v'ashar yiyebidei shemaim, and then God steps in and do the rest. Meaning, Ramban is saying, like the Chinuch, it's not that it's not possible. Of course, like the Zohar said, it's a self-imposed restriction that God has, that He's not going to cause a miracle because of our arts and son of Bnei Adam. The earth's been given to mankind. He's not going to create. It's not going to get involved to do a miracle if we don't act, because that's violating His rules. So He wants us to act, and He'll build on it. That's Zohar's approach. Sefer Chinuch Ramban, their approach is different. It's not that there's a self-imposed restriction. God says, I'm not allowed to get involved. It's not that. It's that I don't want to be so showy. I don't want to make it so obvious that what I'm doing is this blatant miracle. So do what you can, get human involvement, and then I'll build on that. That minimizes the miracle. And there are times, Chinuch brought down, there's plenty of other times in Tanakh where you see this. One example he says is by the splitting of the sea. Why did God have to have it that the whole night before there was this incredible wind that was blowing? To give some kind of rational explanation to it. Oh, you know why there was this land bridge that all of a sudden showed up across the sea? There was a lot of wind that night, so it pushed us out. Again, what does that ever happen? Okay, that's still a miracle, but it minimizes it, and that's God's constant approach. God's approach to how He operates in this world is to minimize His miracles as much as possible. So this second of our Torah is very different to the first, but it's also very fundamental. Is that the second of our Torah is doing is that it started off by talking about this seemingly odd commandment that we have to bring fire to the Mizbeach, even though heavenly fire is going to descend. So if heavenly fire is going to descend each and every day, why are we bringing that fire? So again, two approaches. Both of them are the same in terms of the way God operates in this world is He'll operate after we take human initiative. Why is it that way? Two different approaches. Zohar's approach is that self-imposed restrictions. God just it's impossible for Him to act once He's finished creating the world and declared Haaretz and the of Bnei Adam. Until we take initiative, He can't act. Self-imposed. Again, it's self-imposed, and that's because of and He'll increase what we've done. And the second approach, Ramban and the Sefer Chinuch, is that it's not that He can't act. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want to do it that way. The way He does His miracles is that He wants to minimize them. God is tsanua. He's modest in a sense. He doesn't want to be so flashy. He doesn't want to be so noticed. As much as possible, He tries to minimize His miracles, and that's what happens here. So if we bring fire first and then something descends from heaven and increases, that minimizes the miracle. You could come up with some explanation for that. You could say it wasn't so great. But if it was to come from nowhere, all of a sudden, boom, fire shows up, then that's just way too much. So that's two very different approaches, but they ultimately what they have in common is as follows. What they have in common is that God doesn't act unless we take our human initiative. And that's what we have to remember when we live our lives. We do our hishtadlus. We have to each think what's responsible for me to do, and I have to live a life that's responsible, not just to go through life being somech al nisim, depending on miracles. That's just not the way that we operate. That's not our Masorah, and that's not what our Azal, that's not what our sages, our Chachamim, our Rishonim, that's not the way they've told us how to conduct ourselves. Okay, with this, I want to wish everyone a great day. I want to thank everyone for joining. If anyone has has anything that they want to share, please feel free to do so. Again, because I didn't do this on my computer. It was here on the phone. I'm just going to, I apologize to anyone who wanted to contribute on the phone, but I don't think I'm able to. Oh, 1 second. I think I could do it. I can stop the recording. I could. So I stopped the recording.